Yeah, it's projected.
Okay, so officially starting, today is August the 1st. This is our bi-monthly SIG API Machinery meeting. Thank you for everybody attending and for the ones that are going to join some minutes late. We don't have a super packed agenda today, but we have a number of items that we want to discuss. First thing to comment is yesterday the feature freeze for 112 closed. So we had, as part of our SIG, a number of items and features that we were able to do, hopefully, all the paperwork to make them in. Do you want to expand a little bit on that, David?
Yeah, I can. So we have KEPs and designs open for webhook conversion from Medi. That is proposed to be alpha in 1.12. The design for that, Medi is typing right now, but if he'll let me talk about it, I'll just say that the design looks to be in really good shape to me. I haven't seen any blockers on the design. Stefan had a couple outstanding questions, requests for minor updates. Eric Toon had reviewed it, said it looks okay. It looks okay to me as well. So this is your last call to go into that design and make comments. I anticipate it merging sometime this week, and I am hoping to see the start of implementation also this week. Mehdi, you going to be able to do that?
Sorry, I was typing. I didn't.
The start of implementation this week. I'd like to see polls open for it so people can also look at those.
Sure. That's my plan. To have something this week for you guys to look at. It won't be the final one for sure.
Yeah.
Please give us an idea what smaller PRs we need to send to for this feature.
The other notable KEP that we are going after also for alpha this release is pruning and defaulting. Stefan has design open. It's building on the previous work and sketches that have been outlined in numerous other polls. So I don't think there's going to be surprises there, but that design is also, I think Stefan's going to talk about it here, but that one is another one that we are targeting as alpha for 1.12. And I feel like I am forgetting one other one.
Dry run?
Dry run, yes. I knew I was forgetting that one. That must have been Antoine, because Antoine would have remembered that. That one we had agreed to put in as alpha some time ago, but the implementation is proceeding quite well. There are polls open that implement a couple separate pieces of it, and I'm expecting to see those starting to merge as well.
Very good.
Yep.
I think that covers it. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if Stefan is already connected.
I'm connected.
Okay, perfect. Hello, Stefan. So let's go with first point, if you want, pruning and defaulting.
Yeah, so it's basically the direct transformation of the Google Doc we had. This was discussed in the last 10 days or so. I copied all the comments, so nothing is lost. Just continue in the cap, please. It was basically presented last time. One big change is that there was a proposal, I think by Eric already, that we create the skeleton validation schema from the main one automatically. And David and Mehdi also proposed that, and we discussed that offline, and yeah, the cap represents this now. So we don't expect the user to specify the skeleton. The skeleton is automatically computed. Just defaults must be outside of the quantors, so outside of the logic part of the validation schema. Otherwise, it's as before, but it's completed, especially from the experience from the implementation. So there's a full PR linked in the SIG agenda, implementing everything from end to end. Take a look, comment.
And that's an extension of the PR that we had from about 2 months ago?
Yes.
Yeah,
so it's the same basic code, it's just including skeleton schema.
So as I mentioned, this is one that we anticipate trying to get in and merging for as alpha in 1.12. So again, if you're interested and have comments, now is a good time.
Yeah, I already reviewed it and it looks good. I will do another round of review this week, and I know Eric is doing that this week too.
Okay, good.
Yeah, also for Eric, when he comes back, so I added a part about excluding pruning from subtrees. And there's also a question I linked David and Mehdi and Eric. I want to have your opinions.
Sure, we'll take a look.
Okay, links are there in the agenda. So as David said, anybody interested, now is the right time to take a look. Comment. Do we want to move to your next point?
Yeah. So I had the pleasure to look into KubeBuilder and Operator SDK, which uses controller runtime, preparing a workshop. And I noticed that it looks like we have 4 kind of clients today. We have the client Go client, everybody knows. We have the client Go dynamic client, most of you know as well. And now we have one client from the Operator SDK, which is the lower slide there. And the upper one is about KubeBuilder. Those two are more or less between dynamic and client Go client. They use Golang types. They don't use unstructured. But they have static types in a sense that you have one client for everything. They're very similar. KubeBuilder uses a scheme to translate a Go type to the group version kind. And Operator SDK doesn't use a scheme at all. It requires that you set API version and kind, which gives you the same information. So those can be combined, unified into one. And my question is, do we want to support this style in client Go? Should we have a third client which somewhere lives between dynamic and typed clients?
So I've actually given this some thought because I was working on the dynamic client. And one thing that people had asked me for was, why do you make me do the REST mapping myself? And the answer is, in the case of a conflict where you have ambiguous information that can be mapped to multiple resources, you have to decide what to do. But if we were to take a constrained use case and build on top of the dynamic client that we have in tree, you would be able to include a REST mapper and automatically do a mapping for someone on top of an unstructured type. Now, you talk about how you actually use the external types. Given an external type, there is always sufficient information to take that unstructured type, or to take that external type to unstructured as a direct transformation, because the unstructured comes in as a as JSON, and the JSON tags are supposed to be present in your external types, and there's no defaulting to worry about. It makes it possible to do non-return type values. The difficulty comes in on building the return, right? Is the return unstructured, or does the return require a scheme? But I don't see a compelling reason to not build on top of the dynamic client we already have.
Yeah. So if you look at KubeBuilder one or the other one, I think they are very similar to the dynamic one. The difference, as you say, dynamic client requires a group version resource explicitly. So the scheme translation, no, sorry, the REST mapper translation, right, is taken out of the game.
Yeah. So we actually have a generic typed client that uses strong types and external types already, and it's built into kube control. If we wanted to do that, I could see building one and making that generic, but I don't see a compelling reason to have it in Cube Builder.
This is my question. I don't like to see this spread of clients. There's a requirement, it seems, from users and from library builders. So we should have an answer for that.
So do you want me to, this is Solly, I can step in and talk a little bit about the history of the controller runtime client, if you'd like, just kind of the impetus
Sure.
of the creation.
Go ahead.
So we were actually somewhat inspired by the operator SDK client. The reason the two are separate is kind of the operator SDK round trips all the objects they pull in as unstructured, and then they serialize and deserialize again. And we kind of wanted to avoid a little bit of that overhead, which is the reason for the slightly different approach in the controller runtime. But kind of the impetus is that there were a lot of users coming and saying that, like, they didn't want to have to keep track of like 10 different type clients in their object. And they also kind of felt a little bit frustrated that like they were already passing in an object in a lot of cases. Why did they have to duplicate the information that they were already passing in? So they were like, you know, they would have to do like client set .pods .v1.update.
Yes, who wants type safety?
And then pass in the type again. Well, yes, that
I mean, that's a pretty compelling reason, right? You have a pod, you know you're dealing with a pod. You want type safety on your pod.
I don't necessarily disagree. But I think that the reality is that people were kind of inventing this kind of stuff anyway.
I do think it's up to us to help guide people to what we think are best practices. And if you don't know what it is you're dealing with, then the best practice would be a dynamic client. If you do know what you're dealing with, then the best practice is to use the typed client that gives you the type safety for your language.
Type safety and convenience seem to be often at odds, and everyone seems to have their own opinion on that. I've never seen anyone change their opinion on that. So I think what it's getting at is that people are finding workarounds, and if we can come up with conventions, it may be useful. Is that?
Well, so, yeah. Okay, we already have a client that does this then. Why didn't we use that client?
That's a reasonable question. I don't know the answer to that.
Which client?
Which client? Yeah.
Kube Control. It has a client for the resource builder, which supports the basic get, list, watch, update, delete, patch calls. It could simply be extracted and moved to a different location in client Go if someone really wanted to do it. I mean, that logic is there.
So
and it's
Sunil here, I've been working on Kube Builder for some time, and so which type does it deal with?
It deals with any type for your scheme. So if you register it into your scheme, then it will use a combination of REST mapping plus your scheme to be able to take your runtime object and submit it to the correct location.
Sounds exactly like Kube Builder.
Yeah.
I think this may have just been a case that we were not aware of that area. I had forgotten that was there.
If it is the same thing, then why do we have to argue? We just
we can. So in general, do we agree that something like this makes sense to exist in client Go? I think once we agree on that, then I think we can find a path to get there.
I don't, but I guess I can say it's okay to give someone the shotgun pointed at their foot. I just don't want to hear anyone whine about it later. It's if you're already manipulating a thing that you know is a pod, saying create this generic thing for me seems pretty silly, but okay.
Yeah, I think
there's one possibility. If you have this generic, not generic, it's a static client, so it's the same for all objects. You could implement things like try on update, those helper functions. This is something we cannot do with our generics with the type clients. So I suspect that in Open Operator SDK and in KubeBuilder, those tools will start being created.
We actually have a PR open for such a tool right now. Actually, like we have a couple of kind of utilities wrapped around the generic client, or around the KubeBuilder client that do stuff like that.
Is SIG auto scaling? Is that Solly?
Oh yeah, sorry. I have the SIG auto scaling label set for various reasons, and I keep forgetting to log out of that account and switch accounts when I join different Zoom meetings.
Yeah. Okay, just wanted to clarify. Okay, so it sounds like there's some legwork to go back and look in kubectl, and there may be reusable code there already.
Yeah, more importantly, it is compatible with our existing machinery, right? It doesn't have new constructs. If you want a list, you pass it list options. If you want to update, you pass up the object. Delete options takes the delete, or delete has options. It's structured the same way as the others.
And also, if kubectl is using such a client, I will assume a lot of users will want some clients.
kubectl was using that client because we had accidents when we first started. In particular, kubectl currently has a lot of logic that instead of being a generic client, it is a generic client sometimes and a specific client other times. And it is just legacy we brought forward.
Okay, multiple personality disorder aside, it sounds like we got to the end of that part of the conversation. Yes, Sunil, I saw some nodding, but not any explicit responses. Sally, Sunil, do you guys feel like?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take an action item to go investigate. That's just part of the resource builder, right? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, it's part of the resource builder. It takes a generic REST client. You have to make sure that you specify the correct scheme that you want to use as you construct it and build it. And then after that point, if you were to wrap a REST mapper around it, instead of passing the mapping, you'd have the rest of the pieces present.
Okay, I will take a look at that and see if there's any unification we can do.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a worrying pattern of people, like when I fixed the dynamic client, people came out of the woodwork because they had created their own dynamic clients around our dynamic client to create their own dynamic informers around our dynamic client, instead of helping client Go develop the dynamic list watch informer pattern.
I mean, I think part of this may be that for whatever reason, there's a number of people that find some of the constructs in Client Go to be more complicated to use than they wish. And so, like, I think some of this may be like, it may be worth considering, like, people who aren't necessarily main Kubernetes developers, what are they confused about? You know, what are the areas? That's one of the things that we're trying to do with the controller runtime stuff. Like, what are people confused about? What can we make easier or more straightforward for the common patterns that we recommend?
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend Drift for doing that, though, right? So if you look at Operator SDK, they created their own list watch informer, and then there was something from Anthony NSOC that did something similar. They both did it similarly. They both did it, but they're slightly different, and neither one of them took it to the upstream. And it's a thing that we'd be interested in having.
Yeah, I mean, we tried in controller runtime, at least for the Informer stuff, to build on top of the existing Informer mechanics.
Yeah, but why would you believe that the Informer, a dynamic Informer, wouldn't be useful in general?
I mean, it's less that we believe that the dynamic Informer wouldn't be useful in general, and more that we wanted to put together a prototype, see how actual users used it, make tweaks and feedback. And then when we had something that we were very confident in, we could come back and say, okay, we have this usage information. We have users saying this is useful to work with.
Yeah, the problem with that is that you end up with a lot of momentum where you are, and it's really hard to get anyone to migrate. And so we end up with fragmentation of our client. And like, I know this because I changed a dynamic client, and then all of a sudden there's 3 people who are like, everything just broke. Why did it break? And then, what do you mean it broke? It's usable right here. Well, I built these pieces on top of it. Oh, well, you're like the 3rd person that I've talked to that did that. You've all built the exact same thing, and you're all broken in different ways.
Yeah, so that's the prairie dog approach to finding requirements when people stand up, and it sounds like it's a good time to evaluate what those requirements are. Anyone signing up to do that?
Well, from what I've seen, it's the individual people and people on this project who should know us to be able to add it, right? I mean,
well, yeah, but I mean, Sully brings up a real point, which is the client Go is confusing and not real accessible, even.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I guess
contributors to other parts of this project. So
yeah, if we're gonna pick on Solly, though, Solly also knows me and Daniel and Chow and explaining the use case and then saying, how do we do this? I mean, I at least would be able to point at kube control, do it like this, see if you can just move it and collapse the 2 cases, and we'd have it in client Go today.
So for the record,
and I would also say, I'd put a big warning at the top of the doc. Why are you doing this? Because I like type safety, but I wouldn't stop it from being a thing.
We did have a long discussion about type safety when we were working on this. I mean, I think I am sympathetic to the fragmentation issue. I think I still maintain, though, that sometimes it can be very useful to. Kubernetes is sometimes, like, Kubernetes core is sometimes slow moving, and I think sometimes we also put stuff in there that, like, we end up regretting a little bit, and so I think there's room for prototyping outside of core, especially if we can say, all right, we're working on this thing that's new, it's not necessarily as long-lived, or it's not as strict of with compatibility guarantees, and then we move it into core when we have more experience with it.
I also sympathize on Solid's side because people also complain that client goals is breaking the interface too much. Right? So it has some value to evaluate to the things in another repo first, when it's mature enough, merge it back.
Well, but so we own both repos, right? It's a sub-project of API Machinery. And so now we have different clients and different sub-projects, and we're going to break one of them. And was our life better because of that? Maybe, I guess. Maybe fewer people use it, so when we break it, fewer people whine. But in order to be able to collapse, they're going to break.
Is kube builder following the Semver? Does it have a README saying this is possible? Because client Go does follow Semver, so we want to reduce the chance to break people, right?
Yes, so far we haven't versioned it. It's kind of everyone is getting it from the master. At some point when we feel it's stable, we'll actually be versioning it and follow the similar scheme there.
I thought I saw KubeBuilder announce 1.0.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Yeah, so pretty much if you look at the library interface, we don't think that is going to change a whole lot, because I mean, if you look at the end of the day, the problem that is being solved is people want to work with their type, and sometimes they don't know well ahead in advance what type they are working with. Because if they know the type, they can actually use the generated clients which already exist in client. So yeah, so I think we can actually do a better job at communicating the use of this library and about deprecation if we have to do in the future. But yeah, this is the state right now. Sorry.
All right. I think we should try to move ourselves to a state that has fewer clients that we support.
So yeah, we'll take a look at the kube control client that you pointed out and see the overlap with the existing client that we have in controller runtime, and then maybe come up with a proposal. Either it's already in line, or let's see.
Sorry, I had a problem with my microphone. It should work now. Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
What we had, like, I wanted to provide this feedback. We had, when we started building something around the Kubernetes API and Go client, we had exactly that problem. We did everything with kube control before, and we expected the same behavior and the same things to do, and we ended up, okay, no, we can't. One thing was the apply stuff. I think I discussed on the Slack a bit, but the behavior was quite confusing, and we were frustrated then that people told us to, well, call kube control in the shell if you want to do that, and that looked like bad.
So picking on apply might be a little bit, that's going to be a hard one to pick apart at this particular moment, given the effort that has been underway now for some time to move apply server side. That feature branch is well underway. I don't see us trying to pull the existing apply logic out into something like a client Go. I think we would just let that existing apply logic die where it sits. And when the server-side apply is there, I'm going to expect that as part of those pulls, Antoine is going to provide a client for us to use.
Yeah, no, the apply part aside, that was something else, but the way how to get those objects, if you get YAML, for example, and push them, we had to do a lot of work around with the dynamic stuff and how to find out which group version kind we have, and all that looked so different than it seemed to be in kubectl, and we wanted to have this behavior. So I think,
yeah, I mean, if the goal is I want to have a kube control client in client Go, I would try to move the kube control client to client Go. And things like, it's shaped in a particular way. Our clients are shaped in a certain way around namespace. So you choose your namespace, you choose your thing, you do your thing. And building a visitor pattern around it, maybe. By the time you get into something like parsing logic from your YAML, you're usually talking about something more like a CLI tool. And so kube control, SIG CLI, is trying to create a library for use for building CLIs. That hasn't yet been split out into staging, but it is a thing that could be built.
Okay, but I thought the discussion was about if the client used by kubectl and the Go client should be somehow unified. So.
It would be the case that we would add a third client, right? So right now we have a generated typed client, and we have a fully dynamic client that requires no scheme. And what you have described as the kube control client is a generic client that is fed based on a scheme so that it will decode into particular objects. So you were talking about the construction of a third thing. That is an acceptable thing if we need to build it, but I would build it in client Go. I would not build a different copy of it in a different repo.
Okay. Yeah, I can I can agree with that. Okay. Yeah.
So trying to wrap up, what are the action items after this discussion and who owns them?
So one is, as Solly said, I'll work with Solly about looking at kube control client and see how it overlaps with the functionality that we have in the controller runtime client. And then we can propose after looking at that, what would be the next step.
Okay. Sounds good. Can you add that to
I'll
okay. Very good. Stefan, anything else that you wanted to add to this point before we move forward?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Sounds great.
Very good. So next one is our friend Chao.
Yeah, so Kubernetes have this long-standing problem that we cannot deprecate a version of the API from the main Kubernetes repo because because the storage, like SAD, might store the APIs in an old version, and if you remove the old version, your API server won't be able to read those things back anymore. So, for example, when we migrate to deployment from extensions v1 beta 1 to apps v1, in SCD, they might be still encoded as extensions v1 beta 1. And you cannot just remove the extensions v1 beta 1 from Kubernetes code, because otherwise API server won't be able to read it. So I have this doc evaluating the existing tools and designs targeting at solving this problem. So currently I plan to take OpenShift's approach, which will be a command line tool that will help people to upgrade their storage when they upgrade their cluster. I plan to upstream the thing into a repo in the Kubernetes org, or maybe the Kubernetes SIG org, and make it alpha in the next quarter. And when it's appropriate, we can move it back to Kubernetes main repo. So please take a look at the doc if you have any, you're also interested in the upgrade problem.
Yeah, when you say next quarter, that would be aligning somewhere along Kubernetes 113-ish, right?
I am thinking 112 actually, because this thing is actually not, this thing is decoupled from Kubernetes version, so I can do the work in the 112 quarter.
Well, I guess you've talked about a separate repo. We can see how well that comes together testing-wise. So here's the thing, right? We had talked before that API Machinery was not going to endorse something for a release if the design wasn't well reviewed by Feature Freeze. And this is building on top of an existing tool. It's a tool that I like, but if I make an exception for things that I like, it's going to be harder for, well, right? I mean, think about it. Think about it. If you were someone and you didn't like it, you would not be super happy. In a separate repo, I guess we can talk about potentially a different lifespan, because this would not be included in the release, right?
No.
Yeah.
No.
we can
Yeah,
think about what we would do. It's not that I do not like this. I want to make that clear, right? This is building on a tool that I helped build. So it's not that I don't think the design is good. It's the fairness aspect of it. Because I'm assuming there's people on this call who've never even heard of the tool this is built on.
Sure. I can turn this into a cap, so it can have more reviews in the. So it will get reviewed before Q4. But I think we can start, if we can start this in a different repo, and this thing is actually not tightly coupled with Kubernetes development, I think we can do the development earlier.
Yeah, I think you're right. You think about things like you would expect as something develops fully in lifecycle, there would be some sort of feedback loop with our Kube CI. As we start cycling versions in Kube, you would expect this tool to have to be run. I don't know that I want to try to force that in a 112 timeframe on people in 112, right?
So just maybe, for my education, looks like Chao is going to be on top of what OpenShift already uses for upgrades. Like in the future, how would that work? Because I'm pretty sure you guys keep maintaining that, evolving that.
It doesn't take change. I'm not actually expecting him to vendor us in. I'm expecting him to create a separate command inspired by the old OpenShift command.
Oh,
and as I read it, that's what it looked like he was creating. He was going to take a starting point, and then he was,
I thought going to take the code and put the official thing there, but yeah, okay, I get it.
So David, one more comment on what you said on not endorsing things that are not done before feature freeze. I think we do some, because this is the life cycle of this one is completely decoupled from Kubernetes, and we do address things like clients, Python client and Java client that has their own life cycle. So it could be treated like that. When it's ready, we'll just design the review, review it, and if it's ready, we'll endorse it, right?
Yeah, I'm worried about how it interacts with the CI pipeline for we have upgrade tests, right? Like, I guess I don't know if everyone on the call is aware, but there are a significant number of upgrade tests they go through. They try to run through the prescribed or some reasonable upgrade process. And as we approach release, the upgrade tests will block the release, right? So, and I don't want to see a new feature like this block the release of 112. That feels like cheating.
Sure, yeah, it shouldn't block 112 release. And 112, we cannot remove any deprecated versions either.
Okay. Then I am significantly less worried about it. You're not trying to integrate this into the Kube flow for 112. You're talking about doing it for 113, and you just want to be able to develop in 112 timeframe.
Yes.
Okay. That is significantly less concerning.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So the document is there linked in the agenda. And I guess when we have more details of repo, etc., Chao will let us know.
Yeah.
In the next meeting.
I will also turn this into a cap so it will be reviewed.
Yeah, that makes sense. And since I was confused as well, I think you should make clear that in the Kube 112 timeframe, you don't plan to integrate this into the upgrade pipeline. You would be looking to do that. You probably should give a time in 113 maybe.
Yes.
So that sounds a lot more fair. And I encourage people, if they don't know about those upgrade tests, to go look at them. They're flaking. So.
Wednesday is nothing. Okay, very good. So that was the last item in the agenda. Looks like we are doing good progress for 112 for the things that we want to put in. I'm happy for that. Anybody else on the call have anything else to discuss? No at 1, no at 2, no at 3. Okay, looks like that's it for today. I thank everybody for participating today. I will upload the recording later today and send the link as usual. And we'll see you guys by video conference in 2 weeks. Hopefully Daniel will be back by then. He's doing very well, by the way. He sends his regards. And have a good rest of your day. Okay?
You too.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.